Last chance to register for the upcoming local government elections. People will also be able to check that their details are correct on the voters' roll. At a news briefing this morning, the IEC announced that voting stations will be open on Saturday and Sunday for this very purpose. During the last voter registration drive, a total of 3 million people visited voting stations around the country. The IEC is hoping that young people will turn out in their numbers this time around. A date for the elections has not yet been set.
Is also making a special plea to all existing registered voters to use this weekend to visit their voting stations to update and confirm their address details. The Constitutional Court found in November last year that a voter's address or sufficient particularities of their place of residence were essential to ensure that the voter is registered in the correct voting district. The Electoral Commission has subsequently embarked on a number of initiatives to update and confirm the address details for voters to enhance the quality of the voters' rolls.
The IEC's chief, Masutu Moepe, there. Well, let's get an update on what exactly came out of that briefing. Our reporter Aldrin St-Pierre was there this morning. He joins us now live. Aldrin, good to have you with us again. Just briefly take us through. We know that it's final voter registration weekend. So what was the sentiment from the IEC? You said they mentioned the troubled areas, Vuwani in Limpopo being one of them.
Well, the IEC is quite excited with the final voter registration weekend coming up this weekend. They're calling on all young people to ensure that they make their way to the 22,000 voter registration stations that will be open this weekend from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the afternoon. We also heard that the Home Affairs Department will be open during that same period, that is from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. to allow voters or eligible voters to fetch their IDs or temporary IDs, which is what you need when you register to vote at one of these voting stations, which will be allocated throughout the country, 22,000 of those voter registration stations. What's quite interesting about this weekend's voter registration weekend is that for the first time, voters or eligible voters will be able to go onto the website of the IEC and print out a registration form and fill it in and just submit it to one of the IEC offices or even one of the registration stations, which is something quite interesting. And this is, of course, in coherence with the President signing the Amendment Act of the Amendment Structures Act, which then also calls on voters who will be voting on Voters' Day that they will get more than one ballot in the case where they find that they've changed their mind. Like, let's say if you've made the decision that you voted for a certain party, and before you put that ballot in the ballot box and you decide to change your mind, you will be allowed to take another ballot and choose another party, or even if that ballot paper is spoiled. So you will get that opportunity. One of those concerns raised by the IEC, of course, is the volatile areas, and the CEO not making mention of the names of those districts or areas. And we know what happened during the first week of the voter registration weekend in areas such as Denver as well as Vuwani in Limpopo. And remember that the case of Vuwani in Limpopo is that the residents in Vuwani are challenging the Demarcation Board's decision to amalgamate Vuwani to Malamulela. Remember that late last year, the violent protests that took place in Malamulela, where those residents demanded that they have their own separate municipality. And even though the Demarcation Board at the time said that it was not viable, it actually bent to the pressure from those residents and decided to set up a new municipality which will incorporate residents of Vuwani. And of course, residents of Vuwani are not happy with that decision, and that decision will be challenged at a high court. I understand that that court hearing is expected to be heard sometime later this month, if not next week, if I'm not mistaken.
And Aldrin, there was no word on the date yet for elections.
Well, yes, no word is yet on the date of the elections, as we know that the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Des van Rooyen, is the one who's supposed to proclaim the date of the elections. What we do know is that the elections are supposed to take place in between the 16th of, or rather the 18th of May and the 16th of August. So in between those few months, that's when the elections should be taking place. But one critical issue is that deadline seems quite tight, considering that the IEC rather has made an application to the Constitutional Court seeking clarity around a ruling made last year relating to the by-elections in Tlokwe, where the Constitutional Court found that the elections in Tlokwe were not free and fair, considering that the voters' roll were not given to the participating candidates on time, as well as the issue around the addresses. When the by-elections were held again in Tlokwe in February, that decision was also challenged at the Electoral Court, and the Electoral Court found in favor of the independent candidates, and now the IEC, of course, wants clarity from the Constitutional Court.
All right, Aldrin, thank you very much for that update. We'll leave it there. Aldrin St. Pierre live from that IEC media briefing.